So the proof that Jonah existed is based on the fact that Jonah must have been a fish god known as Oannes, or to the people of Nineveh, Dagon. So what we have here is a failure of Joseph to be able to reconcile actual history with the false history of the Bible. You see, when you study the Bible or you study history with a presupposed landing spot, under the presupposition that whatever you discover has to be relatable to the Bible, has to conform itself to the Bible, then you come with the long diatribes that Joseph likes to write on every video that I produce in order to try to prove his point. You see, the longer you talk doesn't necessarily mean that you're speaking correctly. So to get you guys caught up to what he is speaking of, he says that the ancient writings of a Babylonian priest and historian named Berosus validates the story of Jonah, because Berosus lived in and around 290 BCE. This would be after the fall of the Babylonian captivity, but he still was a Babylonian. So just because the Babylonians fell doesn't mean their society disappeared immediately. So the story that Berosus wrote about is about Oannes. Oannes, and I may or may not be pronouncing it correctly, was chronicling the history of the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and in the chronicling of the Chaldeans. But in the chronicling of that history, he chronicled the aspect that civilization was taught to the Babylonians and the Assyrians by a fish man god named Oannes. Now, Oannes supposedly emerged from the Persian Gulf. Now, if you know anything about geography, and you look at the Persian Gulf, and you look at the story of Jonah, Jonah left Joppa in the Mediterranean Sea. The Persian Gulf is way over here. Got to go through the Suez Canal, down through the Red Sea, and come on up around the Persian Gulf. I spent about 6 months there during the first Gulf War. So he was coming up through the Persian Gulf, not over here. So that part already is a mistake. But he came and delivered the things that were needed, the information about writing and building and irrigation, all the things that were needed to create the Babylonian and the Assyrian and the Chaldean society, civilization. And that is where they learned from, and that is how they built their societies. Now, we know that the Assyrian society came before the Israelite society, but it was through that God. Because he brought wisdom of civilization, what Joseph is trying to say is that he was the preacher, or the God's chosen prophet, to go to Nineveh. Now in Nineveh, it is not Oannes who came and brought civilization to them. It is the fish god Dagon. And so Dagon and Oannes is a fish-headed, human face, human body, and sometimes fish feet, but fish legs, but then human feet type entity that would bring this information and create society. But when you come into the conversation already deciding that everything must track back to the Bible, then you start to make these types of exceptions that just don't fit into your Bible. You see, the book of Jonah was written after the Babylonian captivity. So most scholars say that it was written sometime between 500 to 200 BCE. Now, since the Oannes story is written in around 290, and that's when it flourished, then that's at least 90 years if Jonah is not written until 200. Now, if Jonah was written before that, then the two stories the two stories can't come from one another, right? But the story of Dagon had been taught and had been learned from the the Assyrians, and down into the Babylonians. So Dagon was already a known fish god who brought civilization to people, and the Babylonians just changed the name. He also has other names depending upon which society you're looking at. But since he brought up Oannes, that's the one that we're going to use. as I said, this is a demonstration of having a predetermined landing point when you decide to do study. And anytime you do that, then you will never actually realize what the truth is, because you will always be grasping at forcing things to fit into your narrative. Now, the truth is simply this. People all over the world, throughout time, have always created stories about some entity or some deity or some being coming from the heavens or coming from the sea to teach the people who are already present how to develop their civilizations. In one of the Kemetic stories, it is Thoth. In the Emerald Tablets, it is also Thoth, who flies over the sands of Egypt to the land of Chem after Atlantis is destroyed and restarts civilization. To the people of the Mesoamericans, it was Quetzalcoatl, who comes across from the sky and lands and starts to create civilization. So many civilizations have this idea of someone coming from the sky. The Dogons, in what we call today Mali, believe that these fish people, the Namu, emerged from the ocean, half fish, half man, and taught the Dogon civilization, taught them about Sirius A and Sirius B. And it's intriguing because as far as our modern day culture, I believe it was in and around the 1800s or early 1900s before we realized that there was a Sirius B. But the Dogons had already known this knowledge. Does it give credibility to fish people coming out of the water and telling them about these things? Some say yes. Some say no. Some are like me and say, we don't really know how they discovered this. What science and what knowledge that they had at the time frame to be able to render that Sirius B existed. Just because people don't have airplanes and don't have cars and things of that nature does not mean they did not excel in other areas of technology. But as far as proving the Jonah story, the story of Oannes does not prove the Jonah story. If anything, it's counterproductive to your Jonah story, because Jonah was not coming to teach civilization. Jonah did not emerge from the Persian Gulf. Jonah was not half fish, half man. If anything, it could demonstrate that the story of Oannes was borrowed from the Babylonian people by the Israelites and then written into their stories to make themselves feel greater and feel better about who they are. But always study without a landing point. When you do that, you will most likely find more truth than you will find myth. So you have a great day. And remember always, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.